Working at Amazon was a great experience, but it's incredibly tough and the standards are very high, but you also end up learning a lot.
Could you give us an overview on how the memo works? The structure of it, when it's integrated? I'd love to understand exactly how it works.
Writing at Amazon is how you make decisions. At most companies, there are PowerPoint presentations and decks. At Amazon, everybody's writing a document, and you start off every meeting by reviewing this document. After working at Amazon warehouse, I actually buy most of my stuff used because you get a great discount and most of the products are in really good quality. This is a hack.
Good hack. One of the things is, since you've been talking, everything has come back to the customer, the customer, which is amazing, honestly.
If you don't understand who are your most likely first 10, 100, 500 customers, then you're targeting the wrong people.
Hi, I'm Sarah Hewardine and welcome to Season 1 of She Builds, where I interview product, growth, ops and marketing leaders to understand how they've built high-performing teams, scaled businesses and the frameworks that got them there. So today I'm joined by Shweta. Shweta is an entrepreneur with over a decade of product management, marketing and e-com experience. She's the founder of the Midori Company, specializing in bamboo bedding. Previously, she managed the P&L for Amazon's used business and prevented tens of thousands of products from ending up in landfill. She also led brand marketing for Alexa across Europe. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Pleasure to have you. So I think there's a ton we can obviously go into. We've obviously just spoken before the cameras started. There's loads we can go into today, but I think I'd like to start just understanding a little bit about the experience at Amazon. Mm-hmm. I think Amazon is a very unique kind of business, and there's a lot of questions I always have when I've heard someone's come from Amazon. So you've obviously led two roles there on the product management side and brand side. So maybe you can give us a bit of an overview, what was Amazon like, what was the exposure, and then we can dig into it.
Yeah, working at Amazon was a great experience, right? We were chatting about this before, but it's incredibly tough and the standards are very high, but you also end up learning a lot, right? So I was lucky enough to have two roles during my 5 years there. The first was product. So I was looking at the customer experience, sell-through, and the P&L for Amazon's used business in Europe. And my second one was looking after brand marketing for Alexa across the European marketplaces. Both roles were very different, but similar in ways, which included just being obsessed with the customer and really understanding your customer very deeply. And I think that kind of customer obsession transcends, the entire company. It doesn't matter what role you're in, you are going to think about that Amazonian customer quite often and quite deeply. So it was great.
I think as well, when we think of Amazon, I think everything comes back to the customer, like you said, and we've spoken before, everything comes back to the customer. And when I think about Amazon and the principles of Amazon that we know, as outsiders of the company, the main thing that we hear about is the memo, is the kind of press release that you write if you want to activate something, for example, at Amazon. But when I read working backwards, there's just so much more depth beyond that at Amazon. So maybe could you give us an overview on how the memo works? The structure of it, when it's integrated, is it used for absolutely everything? I'd love to understand exactly how it works.
Yeah. So, to start off, I want to say writing at Amazon is how you make decisions, right? I think it differs between Amazon and every other company, because I haven't really seen other companies incorporate this. But at most companies, there are PowerPoint presentations and decks with bullet points where you're conveying, your next year's roadmap or a customer problem. At Amazon, everybody's writing a document, and you start off every meeting by reviewing this document. So everybody kind of sits around the table and reads this document together. And then your entire discussion is directed by this document.
And is that document circulated before the meeting as well?
You kind of bring printouts to the meeting, or you circulate it immediately before. Okay. People who want to read digitally can. That kind of document culture is kind of the basis of how you make decisions at Amazon, right? Then in terms of new product launches, innovations, new features you want to launch, that's when you get into the working backwards PRFAQ model. So the concept is essentially working backwards. And that is essentially, you think about the customer, you think about what is their problem, and that is where you start. So you have a deep understanding of who your customer is, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and what are their pain points. And you work backwards from that pain point to give them a solution.
Okay.
The mechanism by which you implement this concept is the PRFAQ or the memo, right? And so once you kind of embody this concept, you understand your customers, you know their problems, and you come up with a few solutions that you want to address, the way you distill that and distribute it to discuss with your team is you write a PRFAQ. So a PRFAQ is essentially a press release. So it's a one-page press release that you are writing in a very clear, concise, crisp way that addresses who your customer is, what their problem is, and what is the solution you're proposing. And this should be written in a way that if a customer is reading this one-pager, they get excited about this new feature that you're developing. So it's written for the customer, although they never read it. And in some ways, the press and the outside world, but it is 100% like an internal document. And it sounds really simple, just like who's your customer, what's the problem, what's the solution. But actually, being able to convey these big things in a clear and crisp way is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, it's a skill.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of iteration. So you kind of, you write this document, you write it for yourself, you circulate it to like a small group of people, maybe your immediate team, they give feedback, you iterate. If they like it, they agree with it, and nobody's, found like a fatal flaw in this document, you kind of send it to a wider group. More iteration, another meeting where you review the document together. And then if it keeps kind of making it through these rounds of iteration, it'll go all the way up to your vice president, it'll go up to the senior vice president, and it could even reach Jeff, right? That's kind of like how the chain works at Amazon. And so the PRFAQ process is essentially for, like product features, new product innovation. You can even do it for like a big marketing campaign that you want to launch, new packaging, like anything that you're putting out that's customer facing is going to have a customer impact needs a PRFAQ.
And does this document also, does it detail to the exact, like this is what the North Star product looks like this is the main solution that you're proposing? Because I think often what a lot of companies do is they start with like MVP based on a customer's pain point, and then they like iterate up from that, but they sometimes don't know what they're iterating to. Right. So is this the like North Star of like what should be built to solve that pain point?
So the PRFAQ is essentially the end result, right? So it is the finished product. And there's a lot of nuance, even within this document. So if I'm writing a PRFAQ today, based on the complexity of the problem I'm trying to solve or the complexity of the solution I'm trying to build, this PRFAQ will either be dated a month from now if it's like a really simple thing, or it'll be dated a year from now if it's going to take a year to build.
Okay.
So, like even if it's just a one-page doc, it still has all of these like layers within it. And so it is the North Star, right? But the beauty of the PRFAQ and why it's very different from an MVP process is like essentially the PRFAQ, you're working backwards from the customer problem. For MVP, you're often building towards a customer problem, right? And so when you start by building an MVP, you take into consideration a lot of these constraints that you have. Financial constraints, engineering resources, legal constraints, but the purpose of a working backwards document is that you are proposing solutions without constraints.
Okay.
And then slowly, once you get into the FAQs and the details, you take into consideration these constraints and you come up with maybe a diluted version of what you could build, but that still addresses the customer problem within your constraints.
Okay.
When you're doing the MVP, because you're starting with these constraints, it's more likely that you fall kind of just right of the problem or just left of the problem, and you're not actually addressing that problem because it wasn't at the center of your process, you know? So.
And is that what you find maybe like a lot of product managers do wrong? Is that they go for it to MVP and they iterate towards? Or do you think like fantastic product managers always start with the Amazon approach in mind, but maybe not defined in the realms of how Amazon define it?
Yeah, I think it's like the thing that I've noticed about, you know, fantastic product managers that I've worked for or fantastic product teams that I've consulted with is whether or not they're following this process, you are keeping the customer at the center of what you're doing. And that kind of makes a difference, right? So when I like start working with a team or join a company, what I like to do is just start with the customer tickets, right? So let's immediately, instead of going around and meeting people and doing this kind of like, hi, you know, who are you? What's your role? I just want to get to the board that's tracking these customer tickets and understand what the customers are saying about your product, because that is essentially the crux of what we're doing here.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, product teams that are keeping this at the center of what they're doing and they're spending their meetings talking about like customer feedback, customer anecdotes, like, is there a voice of the customer in the room when you're discussing product feedback, product development? And if there isn't, you're not exactly on track to where you need to be.
Yeah. And do you think this, like, in terms of like keeping on track, right? There's a lot of companies that are smaller startups and they are at their infancy. I mean, you're there now, right? Is this something that you think this process, do you think it's a more of a mindset that needs to be instilled, or do you think like the memo is a fantastic way of instilling that? And do you think these smaller businesses, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 tech startups can actually start to include this in part of their processes and how they go around building products?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I mean, you know, personally, when I launched my company, I started with a PRFAQ, right?
Okay.
And it's a company of one and like a few contractors. But this document that I'd created is a very easy way to share with anybody who comes on board, anybody who starts working with the brand, exactly what we're building, who we're building for, what we're trying to solve, and then the details of how we're going to do that. It's actually saved me a tremendous amount of time versus like, you know, not having this document and then having to reiterate to like every single person I start to work with or who joins the company, like, here's what we're doing, this is what we're about, this is who our customer is. And so I think, you know, with smaller startups, the issue is always like, oh, it's thinking versus doing, right? Amazon is not shipping at the same rate as like a tiny startup. It's just not, because there's a lot more to lose. You're impacting hundreds of thousands of more people every hour. And so I think for smaller startups, the argument can be made of like, oh, instead of spending all of this time writing this document, we should just ship and see what happens, right? Yeah. Let's get in front of customers. And I think that is fair, but there is a benefit to the clarity that this document brings, and at the very least, like, everybody on the team will be on the same page before you're shipping. Yeah. Right? There's a question you need to ask of like, does everybody on your team understand who the customer is, and are they all working towards the same customer? Yeah. And if they're not, it doesn't matter how fast you ship, you're not going to get to the right place. And
when let's say you've kind of getting to the right place, you're at a space where everybody's maybe approved of this release and let's build. What does your operational rhythm look like in terms of like the weekly business reviews are very famous at Amazon as well? Like, how do they work? What's the process? Is it looking at a dashboard, having discussions? So when you're in that build phase, or maybe when you've released and you're iterating, like, what is the general operations of the roles at Amazon look like?
Yeah, I think the first thing, maybe before we get into that cadence, is we talk about like, how do we measure stuff at Amazon, right? And at Amazon, I haven't really seen this in other companies, but I'm sure it exists, is this idea of like input metrics versus output metrics. And I think people have a tendency to focus on output metrics. So an example of an output metric is revenue, net promoter score, average order value, and then these are essentially the outcomes that you want to work towards. Yeah. Input metrics are essentially metrics that you can control, right? So let's say you're launching a YouTube channel with this podcast, right? Your output metric is that you want to get 100 subscribers. Your inputs are, how many videos are you releasing? How many podcast guests have you contacted? How many have confirmed? How many YouTube, like Instagram clips are you creating out of each video? Are you working with any influencers that have like a big following to get you that 100 subscribers or 200 subscribers that you want? And like, are you contacting these influencers? How many influencers have you contacted every day? How many have said yes? So this is all stuff that's within your control that eventually, if you're doing right, will lead to the outcome that you desire. But on the other hand, a lot of businesses that focus on output metrics, like if I'm trying to control revenue, right? It's the end of the quarter, I haven't hit my revenue goal. The easiest way for me to hit that goal now is to run a promotion.
Yeah.
So I can run a promotion, but ultimately I still don't have a deep understanding of like long-term sustainable ways I can increase my revenue. And artificially, I might just be pulling next quarter's revenue into this quarter by running a promotion, right? So for Amazon, they really believe that if you're focusing on the right things that you can control and you're doing them well, the outcomes that you want will follow.
Interesting. Because I think a lot of people I think we've got to a space where people try and look at like key results, what is the output metric? And we've got to a space of like, the kind of key initiatives that you do or the key like actions you take, maybe that's daily or weekly, has almost become secondary.
Yep.
Whereas Amazon is almost going back to sticking with the input metrics. Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And this is like, so going back to your original question of like, how are we tracking these, right? You, as a business owner, you have to know your metrics. You got to be watching them daily, right? Because at the end of the week, there is a WBR or weekly business review in which you're looking at kind of trends. So trends of this week versus last week. How do we do this month versus last month versus the last 6 months versus the last 12 months? And you are essentially trying to uncover what these trends are telling you before the month is up, so you can act on it quicker. And then you have a monthly business review, which is still a little more higher level, where it's like, what do these trends tell you? Are they concerning? Are they not? Can you act now to like reverse a concerning trend? Can you address some of the problems you're seeing? And you want to do that before the end of the quarter.
Okay.
Because at the end of the quarter is another review. It's the quarterly business review, right? And at this point, you're only like 2 or 3 quarters away from your end year goal. And if you need to make changes, like they should have been made the week you discovered the trend is going off track. So we have weekly business reviews, monthly business reviews, quarterly business reviews, and then you have kind of like an end of year review for like, how do we do? What are we doing different next year?
Yeah.
And then separate from that is your kind of operational planning for next year and what initiatives you want to focus on and kind of where you want the business to go. So.
And are those weekly business reviews, are these always like on a Friday? Is there a set day? Any logical reason?
It depends.
It depends.
Yeah.
And is there a, can you be in multiple business reviews? Like, is there an optimal amount of business reviews, or it just depends how many projects someone's working on?
Yeah, it depends on kind of your team structure, right? So Amazon also has this concept of like single-threaded owners, where one person could be in charge of like all of the Echo sales of Europe. Another person is in charge of like the Alexa brand across Europe. And these two business owners are looking at different metrics. So either they could combine it into one business reviews if they're sitting in the same team, but if they're not, then somebody that's like working towards both marketing and sales will sit in on both business reviews, because their work is impacted by and does impact kind of both of these things. So.
And when we like think about like your previous roles at Amazon, one of the things that when you sent your bio over, about the work you did, I guess, on the project management side with used goods and landfill, I'm so curious. I would love to know, what you did, what the initiatives were, because you see on the press, right, the amount of waste that comes from Amazon returns. Like my dad is one of those people. He orders like 50 things, returns 40. But like, what initiatives are you doing? Why was that introduced? I'd love to know more about it.
Yeah, so essentially my first role at Amazon was a product manager for Amazon's used business, which is called Amazon Warehouse, where Amazon has a really interesting returns process because they obviously offer a very generous return policy. I think in Dubai, it's 2 weeks.
Yeah, sometimes they don't even pick the stuff up.
Yeah, returnless refunds. Yeah. Which is like a cost benefit, if it's just like
cheap goods.
Exactly. Then it's not worth actually going and picking up. In Europe, the policies are even more generous because there are so many consumer protection laws. And so, people that have an electronic that for some reason is defective, they actually have months to return it. And I think if I still remember from my days, the return window in Europe is 30 days instead of 2 weeks. So it is quite, it is also partially as a customer, the reason why I shop at Amazon is because it allows me this flexibility of returns. But once you are coming up with, such customer obsessed policies, you do end up with a lot of people returning stuff. Some people are kind of buying multiple items to see which one they like, and then they'll return the stuff they don't like. This happens a lot with clothes. You order stuff in different sizes, see what fits, and then you return what doesn't. So when Amazon receives a return and it's not in like pristine condition, it's not still in the box, it's a little scuffed on the edges, we process it through Amazon Warehouse, where it goes through like a very detailed inspection process. You kind of grade the item as like new, very good, acceptable. And then you kind of put it listed back on the website. So after working at Amazon Warehouse, like I actually buy most of my stuff used because you get a great discount and it's gone through an inspection process and most of the products are in really good quality.
Okay.
This is a hack for
good hack.
Didn't know. But yeah, like essentially allowing these products to have a second life and then promoting them to the hundreds of thousands of people that are coming on the website, you are preventing these products from going to waste, right? And so that was a part of Amazon that I really loved doing because essentially you're helping the planet. You're fighting against this idea of like Amazon is promoting all this consumerism, but it's also doing stuff to like prevent these products from going to waste and ending up in a landfill. And actually the used business in Europe was large. Like we were selling a lot of products. I don't know if I can say the exact number, but it's quite substantial, right? So, and I imagine that's the case across the world.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a really, really like interesting part of Amazon to start your journey in because essentially what you're doing is you can help people connect with the brand of Amazon also, which is, that in addition to offering convenience and low prices and fast delivery and all of these like really great consumer stuff, you're also a company that cares about the environment and cares about your impact on the planet. And you are taking technological steps to like prevent products from going to waste. So,
and might be a silly question, but why were they ending up in landfill to begin with?
So it depends, right? Like I think for some companies, when you have a return, if it's not like in a pristine condition, you cannot resend it to a customer.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you return these pants and there's like a tiny scuff on them, I can't send it back to you or send it to another customer who's buying these pants as new. So you have to have this process of like inspecting the product, grading the product, and communicating to your customers like, hey, this is a pre-loved pant and there is a scuff on the right side of the pant, and because there's a scuff, we're giving it to you at like a 30% discount. You can try to get the scuff fixed or you can wear it with a scuff, whatever you want. But this is about communicating to the customer that there's something wrong with this product. It's not perfect. It's got some baggage, but it's about like making clear to them what they should expect when they're buying a used product. And I think a lot of companies don't have the resources or the willingness to do that. And so what do you do with a product like that? Right? And then it's like, okay, you can try to liquidate it, or you just end up throwing it away, and it's just like a loss.
Yeah.
So I think, to Amazon's credit, they've invented this entire process. Obviously, it does recover money for them too, but it's also about like, how do you communicate to customers, like what is the state of the product they're going to receive, and make sure that their expectations matches what they're about to get. Because if that match isn't there, that product's going to come back. We're going to have to go through this entire cycle again, and then it's costly for both the consumer and the company, right?
Yeah. And one of the things, since you've been talking, everything has come back to the customer, the customer, like, which is amazing, honestly. And when I think about like coming back to the customer, like one of the challenges like we've always faced, and we do face today, and I think this is very common in a lot of companies, is we hear about hyper-personalization, and we hear about, how personalized you can get down to the individual customer rather than just like the standard segmentation you can do on cohorts. What is hyper-personalization? What does it mean to you? And how, maybe this isn't just a question for like Amazon, but, throughout all of your experience, like how do you achieve hyper-personalization?
Yeah, I think I want to change the word a bit from hyper-personalization to like customer obsession, right? Because I think hyper-personalization can lend itself to some odd product practices that I just don't agree with. Like, I think there are a lot of these apps now that are trying to, when they onboard new users, like create such a personalized experience that they're making me answer like a 24-question survey before I even try the app. And that is not what we want to do, right? We don't want to create such a high bar and such a a friction process for a customer to just use your technology. So what we're trying to say is that, when you're creating with the customer in mind, you have to have a deep knowledge of who your customer is, which means you have to spend a lot of time thinking about it. You have to spend a lot of time kind of deciding how do you want to measure this? How do you collect this data? And then how do you form this like customer persona, right? And so for Amazon, for example, if we're launching a new business or we're launching a new product feature and we know we have a hypothesis as to like who is the customer we're targeting, the next question is to like get data to validate these hypotheses, right? Because right now they're just assumptions, and assumptions can be wrong. And so the kind of data you get are, like customer service contact calls. Like, is there data we can get from that? Reviews on the website, like, are people complaining about something that we can, synthesize and then create kind of guesses based on that will validate our hypothesis. So we need to collect data in a way that helps us like understand our customer, validate our hypotheses, and then we can build personas based on that. And it's important that when you're building your personas, they're based on like observations of real customers and not like who we think the customer is and what we think they do. And so for smaller companies, like, this is really like where they should start. You have to start with really understanding your customer persona. And I can give you an example of, like how this comes into play. So I'm married. Shout out to Alex, who's an incredible husband. But he is really interested and like intrigued by new technology. When crypto started emerging and there was like blockchains and smart contract technology, he was working like nowhere near this, but took his time to like understand this technology and like play around with it, and bought and sold some NFTs, and he bought me an NFT, and he has like crypto wallets and multiple apps. And within the same household, like I am not creating crypto wallets, right? Like the most interaction I've had with crypto is that when Coinbase like allowed you to buy and sell some crypto, I bought some Sol, but it was only because it was on Coinbase, right? And which is a mainstream application. So one person in the house is like really intrigued by technology, wants to take a risk, wants to try new things out. And the other person will only really try things out when it reaches mainstream. So if you're launching, something like an Echo device with a smart assistant in there, who do you want to target? Right? Are you going to target the person that's more likely to try new technology and buy your device? Or do you want to keep targeting this person that's never going to try your device unless it's like, oh, okay, all my friends are using it. Let me try and see what this is. And so this is kind of a problem that a lot of companies face, is that if you don't understand like who are your most likely first 10, 100, 500 customers, then you're targeting the wrong people.
Yeah.
And if you're targeting the wrong people, like if Alexa started its business by targeting people like me, I would never buy this technology, no matter how many ads I saw, no matter like how many great marketing campaigns I saw, I just wouldn't convert. And so it's not a question of like, oh, the product is not working and like this is a failed business. It's like we're not reaching the right people. And so like that is the importance of like being customer obsessed and understanding your customers and cutting them at the right lenses. And understanding, like for these technophiles that we want to target first, do they skew a certain gender? Are they skewing a certain income range? Like, what is their social media platform that they're hanging out at? What are their pain points? What tools are they using to solve these pain points? And can we address these? Like that is kind of how you think about customer obsession and not necessarily hyper-personalization, but like it's rooted in a deep understanding of who it is that you want to use your product.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like still too many companies think their product can be for everyone. And for me, like that's always first point of failure.
Yeah.
Like when someone's, when I speak to people and they said, oh, it can be for everybody. I'm like, you don't understand what you're doing enough, because I think that is such a common thread we still see. So when we think about like how you get to like pen on paper, this is what a persona looks like. How are you, obviously the segmentation depends on the customer and it depends on who the different personas are. But what does that like look like? Like, cause I think we see so many examples of this is John, he's from this country, he does this. Like how much deeper do you get within that? And how do you typically segment and build personas?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'll tell you maybe an example of my business, right? So I launched this line of bedding. It's made of bamboo lyocell. It's a really beautiful soft fabric, and one of the features is temperature regulating. And how I kind of thought about it was that I was having these conversations with my mom, who she, because she's of a certain age, has a lot of temperature fluctuations at night, which happens to a lot of women going through menopause and postmenopause, right? And so she was complaining that she kept waking up multiple times a night and just couldn't get a good night's sleep. And so I was playing around with this idea of bedding for a while, and that kind of like, I was like, okay, well, let me just get some samples and see if it addresses it. So I got her some samples of this bedding that I had liked, and she started sleeping through the night. So I was like, okay, great. Here is a customer type. My mom, she's going through menopause or postmenopause, and she has this pain point of temperature regulation at night. And here's a solution, right? So after that, I found like 10 of my friends that were starting to go through menopause, had gone through menopause, or were in the middle of going through menopause, spoke to them about their pain points related to sleep and temperature, and started kind of fleshing out a persona based on commonalities that all of these 11 women had. So once I build my persona, it's about kind of how do you get to the next 100 women going through menopause, right? So after uncovering the pain points that these women were talking about, you start testing some hypotheses. So I created ads, social media posts, blog posts, content that addressed directly these concerns and these pain points, and presented, this bedding as the solution. So then it's a question of you measuring, like, are you addressing the pain point correctly in your communication? So do people click on your ads? Are they engaging with your blog posts? Are they clicking through to the website? If they are, your pain point is speaking to the right audience, right? They're speaking to the right people. And then if they're not converting, it could be something wrong with your website, or it could be like a conversion issue, but you got them through the door, which means you're reaching the right people and you're speaking to their pain points enough that they're intrigued about what the solution is because they felt like this pain point also spoke to them.
Yeah, I love that. Talking, like, I think sometimes people underestimate how much testing you can do with content.
Yeah.
Like before you even have a product, you can do enough content testing to decide, does it bite? Does it have enough like depth there for people to, like you say, interact? So I love that. And when you think about like how you, like, this might be a silly question, but how do you stay on top of those personas? Like how often do you go back to them and keep them alive? And what does that look like?
So, you know, the persona document that you're building should be fairly detailed, right? I'm talking age, income, demographics, needs, wants, you know, like desires. And you kind of get this information either by looking online. There's a lot of information online, by speaking to someone. And then ultimately, if you need to, you can send out surveys and stuff. But every customer anecdote, like every person you're speaking to should be informing this document. And then ultimately you also want to understand, like, how are they making decisions? Where are they making decisions? What, like, is it word of mouth that drives them to buy stuff? Is it, you know, like school posters when they're going to pickups? Like, what is the exact process of like how they receiving information and how they distilling it? And then this document should essentially be like a living, breathing document in your company, right? And like, every time you're getting customer feedback, every time somebody's writing a review for your app, or somebody's emailing your support system with like a question or like a complaint, or they want a refund, or they want to purchase something else but your website doesn't quite allow them to do that, this goes into your document.
Okay.
Right? So it's a question of like, you're doing quick updates, but like every piece of information you're getting about your customer, you're updating this document just so that it is the most like cohesive, comprehensive, up-to-date document of who your customer is. You know, like I have these persona documents, and like if I'm going out to dinner and I'm meeting like a new type of customer persona and they're telling me information, I add that into my document.
Okay.
Because it helps me essentially reach the right people with the right message at the right time.
So you just keep them up to date all the time, like.
Yeah, and you know, you think about it as a big lift. It's not, right? Because you've already done the hard work. You've spoken to so many people. All of this information is swimming somewhere in your brain, and for a lot of people, they like it's all up here, and they know it. But the point is that you document it well, and then you're not at risk of like veering off course with understanding who your customer is, or that you can very clearly communicate to anybody else in the team, like, this is who we are targeting, this is who we're building for, this is the problem we're solving.
And when you think about personas and you think about a lot of people that typically, like I've thought about this in the past, right? You do your personas and they can get so neglected and forgotten about, and then you feel like you go back 6 months time, you have to do it all again. Yeah. So like I love the idea of like always being on top of it, and it is all up there. You're right. Yeah. So going back to your experience, thinking about, you know, product management, that's really been your career through and through. You made a shift at Amazon, and your shift was to brand. Yeah. Why?
It's a good question. I think for me, like I started, you know, during my product career, because we were working in such an interesting I was working in such an interesting part of the company where, you know, there was this like positive message of, you know, what my team was doing with giving used products like a second life. And I was trying to effectively communicate that to customers, right? So does it make a difference if I say pre-loved versus used? Does that impact whether people buy it? If they get like a message at the end of their purchase and be like, you stopped, you know, one product from ending up in landfill, do they feel better about their purchase? Are they more likely to buy used more or not? This kind of stuff is less, you know, like pure product for me, and started like veering into brand a bit, because it's about creating affinity with between the customer and like the company. And so I was very interested in exploring that more. And then when the role at Alexa opened, I decided to apply for it because it was just, it was at the time like new technology, still not very prevalent in Europe. And a lot of the work had to be done to like get customers comfortable with the technology and understand it well enough to like allow it into their home.
And what was that like learning curve like to go from product to brand? Did you feel like it was a steep learning curve, or did you feel like you had a lot of the foundations from product management?
Yeah, I think it was, at least my team at Alexa and Echo in Europe, they used a lot of the product foundations to run a brand. So we were still doing like input-output metrics. We're still reviewing, like for brand, the danger of it is that it can get fluffy and immeasurable. And like it is a real problem that you have with brand. It's like when you're doing all of these like emotional campaigns that you're trying to like create a connection between your company and the customer, like how do you measure the impact of that, right? And that is something that you really struggle with because it's, mostly qualitative data and it's self-reported, and that can get really, really unreliable at times. But we did our best to like measure what we could and then focus on, the inputs and the measurable stuff when we were creating campaigns like that. So yeah, I felt like I had a lot of the foundation, but the immeasurable part was what I struggled with the most and still do.
Yeah. I think as well, because we've been in such a world over the last 5 to 10 years where everything has been performance driven, and it has been everything about performance. You measure every single dollar you spend, what's the ROI of that brand, like I really feel brand lost its way, and I feel like a lot of people didn't know what to do with brand. But I almost feel like we're in a world now that is so cluttered on the performance side and the measurable side, that brand is almost finding its way again at the moment. And I feel like you see that with a lot of brands and how they're activating and how they talk to their customers. But I wonder, do you think there's like, how do you strike the balance between the brand and the performance? Do you think you can?
I think there's a role for each, right? Like, I think it's fair for most people to focus on like what you can measure, and so you can understand like where to spend your resources. For me, just based on kind of the experience I've had and what I've seen, especially at Amazon, is like you cannot neglect brand, because that emotional connection, and this is a belief I have because it's hard to measure, but that emotional connection between the customer and your company is ultimately why they choose to buy from you versus a competitor. And it's not necessarily all about price and promotion place, but it is a lot of like, especially now, do I connect with this brand? Do I appreciate its values? Am I aligned with its values? And in order for a customer to make that judgment, you have to communicate your values very clearly. And it's not just like, we have this suite of products. It's about,
so what?
Do you care about the environment? Like, what do your products do? Like, do your products like make the world a better place? Have you thought about that? Are you communicating that to your customers? Even if you don't believe in like that, right? It's when you're creating the products, like, do you have high standards of quality? Do you believe in like processes that help you create brilliant, beautiful products? And then, are you doing this because you deeply care about customers and value that they're working hard and you want to make sure that they're getting value for their money? Like, that also is a form of brand marketing, right? Because you want to tell these customers that you care about them, you're thinking about them, and you value them and their hard work and their money. And so it's not all about, like the environment or like how you make the world a better place, but it's also about like, how do you think about creating products? And are you just doing it like the bare minimum to like get some dollars and grow some revenue and then IPO and then retire? Or do you really care about what you're doing and you're doing it for like something deeper than just a cash exit?
Yeah. And I think brand, like you say, like it touches everything. It's not just like these big top of, above the line marketing campaigns. It's really not. It's like, it's how well you respond to my inquiry. It's how you respond with my refund. It's how quickly I get my refund. I think it touches everything. So with regards to Alexa then, what was some of the challenges maybe you faced, dealing with Alexa and taking it to market?
Yeah, so Europe is a very interesting market to have worked in Alexa. At the time, like Echo and Alexa was a new-ish technology. Like, it wasn't very mainstream. I don't know if it is now because I'm a little disconnected from it. But it was very new at the time, and the technology was very misunderstood, right? So privacy is important everywhere to everyone. But it's especially important in Europe and in countries like Germany, where they have maybe a complicated history with espionage and being spied upon, right? But here is an American company that is selling a device that has a microphone, and you want to put it into your home. And so it's about, like, how do you explain that technology to people in a way that's really simple and easy to understand, in a way that makes them go, okay, I get it. Because I could sit and explain, like, actually, I couldn't even explain how the technical details work of, of Alexa. But if I tell you, like, your device is not always listening to you, imagine, like, walking down the road in a foreign country and everybody around you is speaking a language you don't understand, but then somebody says Sarah, and you know what Sarah means. You immediately respond to it. That is how Alexa, like, wakes up when you say the word Alexa, right? So the device is not always listening. It doesn't understand your conversation. But when you say Alexa, it wakes up. And then it starts processing what you're saying, right? And so distilling this very complicated technology in, like, easy to understand analogies is, like, part of what that marketing was. And then the other part is also being very clear about your brand values. Echo devices and Alexa is used by people of determination. For example, somebody with limited mobility can use the device to, like, control their thermostat and switch on and off the lights and lead a very independent life without having to, like, rely on other people to do this for them, right? Like, that is something that the team took really seriously, and we invested in, like, new features around this. And so communicating that as well to the team, like, helps them understand the uses of technology, in addition to, like, the kind of normal everyday use cases like kitchen timers and recipes and stuff like that.
And that experience then of that whole brand piece of Alexa and everything that you've done from the brand at Amazon, you've obviously now come into your own and you're, you've started your own startup. Like, how do you leverage that now? Has it just almost become second nature, that experience on the brand front? And how did you get from, I guess, like 0 to 1? So you mentioned your mum was the main kind of trigger for, like, pain point, which is interesting. But how did you get started with the startup? Because I think it's incredibly daunting to a lot of people. And there are some fantastic people out there that work, whether it's in tech startups or other companies, that have a drive for entrepreneurship and they want to. But I think there's often a lot of, like, do I have the right funds? Is this the right problem to solve? When do I quit my job? When do I go all in? It's like, how was that shift, and when did you start to focus more and more on the business?
Yeah, I think for me, it wasn't like, I didn't, like, say, okay, I want to start my business, and then immediately I had this product and it was solving this customer problem, right? For me, I started actually selling on Amazon to understand the market a bit better. So I would sell different types of products. We were selling home goods, vases, candles, understanding kind of price sensitivity of people. I would like play around with price, see what people would pay for different types of products. And I was doing this on Amazon. I was sending out surveys to customers, to, like, friends of friends. And I was like, forward this around to understand, like, what are their pain points that they are experiencing in this market. And then when my mom, I had this kind of interaction with my mom and got her these samples, I started diving into this experience a little more. And I think, when I moved apartments and needed to buy all new bedding, it was a nightmare here. Like, it was very expensive, like 3 to 4 times what I would pay in the US or Europe. I started asking my friends, like, where are you getting your bedding from? They were like buying it in the UK and bringing it back with them, which is just absurd. And then a lot of the bedding is also just like not made for this like hot, humid climate with high ACs. And so it was a very slow discovery to like, okay, here's a kind of problem with multiple different customer personas that I can address with a product. And for me, like the big thing that I struggled with is like distribution, right? Like at Amazon, you don't worry about distribution because there are so many people coming to the website every day. Like you launch a feature and it's in the press within a minute. Here, like nobody knows who you are. Nobody knows your product. They don't trust you. So I think it's definitely like a grind going 0 to 1. But a lot of what you learn at Amazon of like being obsessed with the customer, really thinking deeply about this problem, like helps you kind of get there, right? So for me, it was simple as like, how do I get my first customer? Great, mom is going to buy this. Perfect. Then it's like, how do you get your next 10 customers, right? And like, am I reaching them the right way? Then it's like, okay, got 10. How do I get the first 100? And then if you're breaking down this big, daunting, I'm going to build a company into these very small steps, it gets a bit easier.
Yeah.
It is very slow moving. It's not like a overnight success, right? Like, and especially working at big companies and fast-paced jobs, like that is a bit of an adjustment. But if you, again, really deeply care about your customer and care about the problem, you kind of stick with it. And like you're testing and learning and testing and learning and iterating along the way. So,
and how then, with that whole testing and iterating, how does it differ from Amazon, right? So product manager at Amazon to product manager at your own startup.
Yeah.
Like, do you feel the differences there?
I mean, the good part about being at my own startup is that I don't have something to lose, right? Like, I think at Amazon, like, you have to check everything like 100 times, like, make sure there are no typos. If there's a typo, some press is writing about it, right? Like, it is a very high stakes launch, but it's also very fulfilling because you're immediately getting like million impressions, right? For here in my own startup, like I can just keep testing, keep changing. And then if I get like 10, 15 people look at it, great. Like it's a good day, you know? So the scale is very different. And I think that allows more freedom, you know, when you're working on something a lot smaller, like you can do a lot more. You can fail faster and fail hard, and like it's okay because tomorrow nobody will remember, right?
Yeah.
And so there is a lot more freedom that comes with it, which I'm enjoying. But it was still like an incredible experience to have, you know, like something launch and then you just like your mom is seeing it and the other day and like your friends are all like, oh, there's this new buy box feature, and like great, like that was me, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a really good part.
Nice. Amazing. So my final question to you then is, I've introduced something on the podcast called Pass the Toolkit. So what app, resource, book, podcast, anything would you recommend to anybody who is maybe on their path towards entrepreneurship now?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think for me, stuff that helped was like very different. I think actually it was a book about like Naval's quotes. I don't know if you know.
Okay.
It's called The Almanac of Naval, and he basically synthesizes like how do you get from a path that you're on to like a path of freedom and a path of being rich. But it's not a question of like, you know, you're being rich for like status. So you're not chasing like the private jet and the arts club and the kind of social status stuff. It's like, how do you find true freedom of like, I am free to spend my time how I want. I'm free. Like I have enough money in the bank that I don't need to go on a 9 to 5, and I can like spend the day with my kids if I want. I can spend the day with my husband if I want. And it's like a series of his thoughts, and like how to achieve freedom. And I think once I read this book, I was really, I was working at Amazon. I was questioning kind of like how much freedom I had in my life. And I wanted to be able to, start a family in a few years. And I just thought to myself that if I do want to like spend more time with my kids or be a more like engaged mom or wife, do I have the ability to do that within the constraints of my current life? And I didn't. And so that book was really important for me to like light that spark.
Amazing. Awesome. I'll give it a read.
Yeah.
So look, that's all we've got time for today, but thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time. I think this has been such a good discussion for anyone who's in the product world, brand, and even kind of looking to go out themselves. So thank you so much. To those listening, please follow, like, and subscribe for future episodes.